The level of complaints I had because of the noise coming from this sector yesterday means I intend to do something about it. Now, I've ruled that I'm not interested in putting that piece of information to the House. It doesn't require a point of clarification. My mind is absolutely clear. If the member has a fresh point of order, I will hear it, but I'm not going to have arguments continuing on that particular point of order. And if a member wants to leave the chamber, he's certainly welcome to do so. Question.
Speaker.
Point of order. This is a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, do you intend, Mr. Speaker, to rule on the length of answers we are getting from the Minister of Finance that's leading to disorder?
The member will also resume her seat. I will judge, as I've said on many occasions, the length of answer, but when there's a constant interjection coming from my left-hand side to the Minister that's answering the question, clearly that gives the opportunity for the Minister to then be responding to those interjections. Question number 2, Andrew Little.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Does he have confidence in his Minister's implementation of the Whānau Ora programme in light of the Auditor-General's report finding $42 million of its $138 million budget in its first 4 years was spent on administration?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
After the $42 million spent on administration and the untold millions eaten up by service providers, how much Whānau Ora money is actually reaching families in need?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have the exact number, but I can quote the Auditor-General's report, where she talks about the success Whānau Ora has had for many families that they spoke to.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Why, when 2 years ago the government announced Whānau Ora was being overhauled because it was wasteful and ineffective, has nothing changed?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Quite the contrary, actually. What has changed, and I acknowledge that there were some early teething issues when you try something new against a very complex and complicated environment. In an environment actually that hadn't been delivering for those families. I accept that there were some teething issues, but actually there are now joint agencies, and what's happened is there are now 3 commissioning agencies, and I think the new structure that's in place is actually seeing the greater provision of services for those families with those complex needs.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
When did senior ministers on the Crown Iwi Whānau Ora Partnership Group advise him that there were issues of wasteful spending in Whānau Ora?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't simply have those dates, but I do know that over time there have been reviews. As I said, the system was new. It was trying to tackle these needs for complex families, and I think it's actually building into a program that is being very successful for those families. In fact, if you go and have a look at the Ministry of Health, for example, they've actually done a review on Whānau Ora general practices and compared them with mainstream general practices, and they've gone on to say that they perform as well or better. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a new way of doing things, putting families at the heart of solving those issues with a navigator, with these commissioning agencies, and I do think it's building into a program that's delivering results.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Why has it taken the Auditor-General's office and an expensive audit report by her to identify the wasteful spending and the $42 million spent on administration, when he had ministers such as Bill English and Stephen Joyce sitting on the Crown Iwi Whānau Ora Partnership Group there to advise him on the progress of the implementation of Whānau Ora?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I don't think the member actually accurately categorises things. What has happened is there were some one-off costs, and there was a new way of doing things, and there has been, and I think that came with those costs and some early teething issues. But actually the changes that took place because of the review work done by a variety of ministers, including the work done by TPK and Tariana Turu when she was in Parliament, and actually it led to these commissioning agencies, and the commissioning agencies I think have done a much better job actually at tightening up the system and delivering the results we want.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Having spent $137 million of taxpayers' money on Whānau Ora, does he agree with the Auditor-General that, quotes, it was not easy to describe what it is or what it has achieved, end quotes, and if so, what consequences will his ministers face?
The Right Honourable Prime
Mr.
Minister.
Speaker, firstly, as I said, the Auditor-General's report actually doesn't cover, for the most part, the phase where now you've got the commissioning agency. So that's the first point I'd make. Secondly, what I'd say is that this is an area where we've always spent a lot of money, and successive governments have, and actually they've failed to deliver results. And one of the reasons is that these families have very, very complicated needs. So when you actually look at Whānau Ora, which nowadays has commissioning agents, within that has the providers that go out there and have navigators, a person who actually stands or sits alongside the family and helps them navigate a range of different agencies and support measures. Actually, I think that is the right way of tackling a very complicated and difficult area.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Does he accept that had he bothered to get value for money out of Whānau Ora and other government programs, he would now be in a position to keep his promise to post a surplus in the budget?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
No, and quite the opposite, actually. This government, over the course of the last 6.5 years, has challenged the siloed approach that was in place under the previous government. And actually what it's delivered is far better results. That's why the government is actually quite happy to have better public service targets, why it actually measures those targets, and why from everything from health to education to welfare, we are delivering better results for New Zealanders, because we are doing things a different way, and frankly it's a more integrated and better way.
Question number 3, Todd Muller.